Hello again, boys and girls. Now we're going to look at the second story in the packet for this week. It's called The Beltons Imagination. As we go through this story, we are going to make a plot diagram. You are used to doing these in reading. So on one side, we're going to write the characters. On the other side, we're going to write the settings. And then down below, we're going to write the plot, or what happens in the beginning, middle, and end of the story. So we're going to fill this out as we read the story together. It is a long story, so I would not suggest reading this all at one time. I would maybe listen to half of the video one day and then the other half the other day, to break up the story because it is really long. Okay, let's start. The roar of jet engines filled the airport waiting area as Murillo Belton and her older sister Linda sat waiting. They had not seen Vince, their favorite uncle, in a very long time. Their mother was starting a new job, so Uncle Vince was going to help take care of them for the summer. Uncle Vince was a world traveler. Murillo and Linda were pretty sure that he hadn't really sipped tea on a flying carpet, but they loved his stories anyway. It took a lot of effort for the sisters to contain their excitement as they saw him walking toward them in another funny outfit. Okay, so let's add what we've learned so far for character, setting, or plot. So we have some characters. We have Murillo, who is one of the sisters. And then we have the other sister, who is Linda. And then we have the uncle, Uncle Vince, who seems to like to make things up, make up crazy stories. Okay, I think those are all of our characters so far. What about settings? Well, right now they're at the airport. And they are waiting for Uncle Vince. He is just getting off his plane to visit. Okay, so for the plot, we could say something about Murillo and Linda wait for Uncle Vince at the airport. And he has arrived in a funny outfit. So that tells us something about his character. Okay, next page. The next day, the girls begged and pleaded with Uncle Vince to take them on an adventure. Okay, girls, where to? Swimming with sharks in South Africa? An African safari? I'll take you anywhere. Uncle Vince said, smiling. The girls were both thinking the same thing, their favorite place. The park, they shouted. Once there, the girls rushed to the swings. Close your eyes, Uncle Vince said to Murillo. Pretend you are a bird flying higher and higher. The wind is whipping against you and the clouds are like pillows. Murillo giggled as she soared higher. Then she opened her eyes. She was flying. White puffy clouds surrounded her. Was this a dream? She shook her head, and suddenly she was back on the swing, slowly making her way down to the ground. Murillo looked at her uncle in shock. I felt like I was really flying, like a bird. Maybe you were, he winked. After a while, they decided to hit the ice cream truck and then head to the pool. The girls thought Uncle Vince might appreciate a snow cone, their favorite treat. He loved the way the cherry flavoring mixed with the shaved ice. This is a great combination, he explained. It reminds me of a dessert that I once shared with a Russian princess. Delicious. The girls wondered if he really had met a princess. Okay, so we still have the same three characters, but we have a new setting. Now they have gone to the park. And what happens on the park? What happens at the park? Well, Murillo imagines she is flying, right? And it's so believable to her that she thinks that it actually happens. So we see that this family has a really active imagination. Okay, next page. Each day of that week and the next, Uncle Vince followed his nieces to the park. He told them stories of talking tigers and fiery dragons while they devoured their snow cones and swam in the pool. Uncle Vince liked the park, the pool, and all 5 flavors of snow cone. It was always fun, and the girls seemed to enjoy themselves. When he wanted to show them something different, it was time to create some new adventures. One day, while eating a spearmint snow cone, he asked his nieces as politely as possible, "What else do you do for fun during the summer?" Linda and Murillo looked at each other with surprise. Playing in the park and at the pool was what they always did for fun during the summer. They hadn't really thought of doing anything else. That night, over a dinner of Uncle Vince's magnificent macaroni and cheese, Murillo and Linda asked their mother what else they could do for fun. "I thought that you enjoyed the park," she said. "I was hoping that the girls and I could do something new and different," Vince said to his sister. A big smile spread across Mrs. Belton's face. "I have an idea for a fantastic adventure," she told them. "I suggest that you take a trip to the bookstore." Murillo, Linda, and Uncle Vince rolled their eyes. Okay, we have a new character. Who is it? Well, it's their mom, whose name is Mrs. Belton. You could also just write Mom. Okay, and we have a new setting. Where were they for dinner? The house. And we can add a new plot point. So she imagines they're flying. They visit the park all the time. And one day, Uncle Vince wants to go someplace new. And we should probably also say that Mrs. Belton says they should go to the bookstore. Do you think they're really going to go to the bookstore? Or do you think they're not going to listen to her and go somewhere else? They don't seem very excited about the bookstore. Well, let's see. "I have an idea," said Uncle Vince. "Let's visit my old friend Twinkles the tiger." "Who?" asked Linda. For a split second, she saw her uncle and a tiger sitting side by side in matching armchairs. She shook her head and the tiger was gone. But Uncle Vince was smiling at her, knowingly. The next Saturday morning, Linda reminded everyone that it was time to leave. "Linda likes to do things promptly," Mrs. Belton explained. Everyone tried to guess where they were going. "Should I have packed a lunch?" Mrs. Belton asked. "Do we need our bathing suits?" asked Murillo. "All you need is your imagination," Vince answered, spreading a map over his lap. "Maybe we do need a little more imagination in our lives," said Mrs. Belton as they drove off. Along the way, Uncle Vince encouraged Mrs. Belton and the girls to imagine places they wanted to visit. 2 hours later, they arrived at their destination, the city zoo. Even though they had never been there before, they knew it was only 15 minutes away. Instead, Uncle Vince had taken them down streets that none of them had been on. "I can't believe we live this close to a polar bear and never came to see it," Mrs. Belton laughed as they walked across the zoo, looking at all the animals. She was enjoying herself, too. Ever since I watched a tiger groom her cubs in India, these big cats have been my favorite, Uncle Vince remarked. In fact, let's visit Twinkles. We haven't seen each other in a long time. Just imagine what he might do when he sees me after all these years. Okay, so we don't have any new characters, but we do have a new setting. So they didn't go to the bookstore, they went to the zoo. And what could we add for our plot? Well, what does Uncle Vince do? He decides that they should go to the zoo. And he doesn't take them the normal way. He drives a way that's more interesting. Why do you think he does that? Well, I think he's really into imagination. I think he's trying to spark their imagination by going a creative route so that they kind of forget where they are, that they're just right by their house, that it feels like more of an adventure if they're going on a long drive. Maybe you feel like that. If you've ever been on a long drive in the car, it feels like an adventure because you're sitting in the car for so long waiting. Okay, moving on to page 9. Just as the group rounded a corner, they were greeted by the blaring sound of a trumpet. They saw a crowd parting in order to make room for a tiger and its trainer. When the tiger saw Uncle Vince, it almost seemed to smile. Then the tiger walked over to Uncle Vince, lifted its paws, put it on his shoulder, and licked his face. Do you think this is really happening, or do you think it's imagination? Well, let's see. Allow me to introduce you to Twinkles, Uncle Vince smiled. The entire family laughed nervously. Hello, Twinkles said to them before continuing with his show. Said Murillo. Did that just happen? See what happens when you try something different and use your imagination? Uncle Vince replied. Now let's get a snow cone. Mrs. Belton and the girls weren't sure what to believe, but they still had a lot of fun. The following day, Uncle Vince brought Murillo and Linda to the museum in the city. Inside, he pointed the way toward a hall filled with paintings, statues, and stone carvings from ancient Egypt. Linda said that she would enjoy working in a museum. Uncle Vince had another idea. How about working as an archaeologist, a scientist who digs up items called artifacts? Okay, so still no new characters. Well, you could argue that the tiger is a character, so his name is Twinkles. We have Twinkles the tiger as a character. And we have a new setting after the zoo. Where does he take them? To the museum. They are having quite a fun summer, I would say, going to all sorts of cool places. I'm going to let you write the rest of the plot points. I'm not going to write them because I want you to think of them yourself. So after they visit the zoo, you might write about what happens there. And do you think that the tiger actually came up and licked him on the face? No, probably not. But I think because of their imagination, they were able to imagine that this happened and feel like it was real. Okay, so I would write something about what happens with the tiger, and then I would write another plot point about what they do at the museum. Let's keep reading about that. Suddenly, Murillo and Linda were standing in the middle of the desert, dressed in khakis from head to toe. Welcome to Egypt, Uncle Vince said, handing them each a shovel. Before they knew it, they were shoveling sand and soon had a collection of artifacts. A while later, Uncle Vince looked up at the setting sun. It's getting late, he said. Let's bring these artifacts back to the museum. The next thing Murillo and Linda knew, they were back at the museum, dressed in their old clothes. Uncle Vince pointed to the glass case in front of them. The girls gasped, for it held all the artifacts they had just collected. So again, do you think that really happened? No, it's probably a result of their imagination. So I think this story is trying to teach us something about the importance of imagination. A week later, Uncle Vince took the Beltons to a soccer game at the new stadium. And we're going to make another plot point about what happens at the soccer game. By the time they got to their seats, there were thousands of fans already making a racket in the stands. You know, I always wanted to play professional soccer, Mrs. Belton daydreamed. I'd love to know what it feels like to kick a winning goal. Who says you've lost your chance? Murillo asked. Uncle Vince looked down at his niece and smiled. Very funny, Mrs. Belton laughed. Your old mother accomplishing the feats of a soccer star is out of the question. Mrs. Belton closed her eyes. After a long week at work, it felt good to relax. She thought about her old days on the college soccer team. Then, when she opened her eyes again, she was greeted by the sound of 1,000 voices shouting, "Goal! Goal! Goal!" She was wearing a soccer uniform, and the goal net was right in front of her, guarded by one angry-looking goalie. The ball was at her feet. She backed up, ran forward, and kicked with all her might. Around her, the crowd erupted in cries of joy. Before they knew it, the summer was over. Uncle Vince was preparing for another trip. This time, it was to help research barn owls in South America. I'm a night person, and owls are nocturnal too. It's the perfect combination, he pointed out as he threw his chef's hat into his backpack. Murillo and Linda sat quietly on the couch as he packed. They were sorry to see him go. I may be leaving, Uncle Vince began, but the adventures we've had are only the beginning. Remember that your wildest dreams are only as far as you will allow your imagination to take you. Though the Beltons were never sure if they'd really gone digging for artifacts in Egypt or kicked a winning goal, they didn't care. Uncle Vince's visit had taught them to use their imaginations and to try new things. We might add one final plot point about what they learned. And now let's look on this last page. This is a really good activity that I would encourage you to do. It has to do with finding the theme of the story. Remember that a theme is a moral or a lesson that a story teaches us. So this story has a clear theme about imagination. I want you to think of what that could be, and you can write that here or on a separate piece of paper. And then we're going to come up with 2 details that show us that that's the theme. They already gave us one, which is Uncle Vince and Twinkle's hug. So what could be 2 other details that show us that that theme or that lesson is important in this story? There are also other activities you can do here if you have extra time and are looking for more things to do. There's vocab words that you could write in sentences or draw pictures of, and there's a writing assignment that you could also do. I don't want to overload you with too much work. Remember that about 1 hour of doing schoolwork a day is what we suggest. So that would probably be about 30 minutes on the packet a day, and then 30 minutes of either silent reading or of doing something online, whether that's Lexia, Dreambox, or Google Classroom. Thank you so much.